I didn't raise my voice when the HOA president slammed a hand down on the table and accused me of defacing community property. I didn't even bother pointing toward the bare hillside visible right outside the clubhouse window, where the stumps of my oaks still stood like gravestones. Instead, I slid a folder across the table, 42 pages, neatly tabbed, stamped by both the Department of Veterans Affairs and the county's Historic Preservation Office. The first page bore a title bold enough for even the most stubborn among them to read: Protected Memorial Land Dedication, recorded 1998. Their lawyer leaned forward, started scanning, and I watched the color drain from his face before he even got to the signatures. He closed the folder slowly, like it might catch fire in his hands. That was the moment I knew it was finished. They could rant, they could bluster, but the law was no longer theirs to twist. The game was over, and they knew it. The truth is, I hadn't moved here looking for a fight. After 22 years in the Army, I wanted something quieter, something that didn't reek of diesel exhaust and sunburn sand. My father had passed not long before, and I inherited his property on the edge of a subdivision that had sprung up in awkward fits and starts. My land wasn't vast, just shy of 5 acres, but it was mine, and it carried weight far beyond acreage. At the back slope stood a line of old oak trees, their limbs thick with decades of history, the kind of trees you don't plant, you inherit. Beneath them, I had placed markers years ago for the men in my unit who never came home. Not Arlington Whitestone, just modest plaques, crosses, a brass plate at the trailhead that reads simply, dedicated to fallen service members. My father, a veteran himself, had helped me register that grove under the county's Historic Preservation Program. It wasn't just sentimental, it was legally recognized as a veterans memorial site. At the time, I didn't think much about the paperwork. Who would be brazen enough to touch something like that? Life on that land was simple, and I liked it that way. I patched the roof of the old cabin, strung my fishing rods by the door, stacked firewood under the lean-to. On quiet evenings, I'd sit by the creek that ran shallow most of the year and listen to the frogs. I didn't go to the neighborhood barbecues, and I didn't join any committees. My property wasn't even inside the subdivision's platted boundaries, so the HOA wasn't my concern. I figured if I minded my business, they'd mind theirs. For a while, it seemed that way. The subdivision's manicured lawns and vinyl siding could sit on one side of the ridge. I was content with my oaks and my cabin on the other. The first sign of trouble came in the form of a flimsy piece of paper taped crookedly to my gate. It had the HOA letterhead at the top and violation notice printed in bold. It cited unkempt property appearance and unauthorized signage. I laughed out loud when I read it. The signage in question was my brass plaque at the entrance to the grove. I assumed some overeager volunteer didn't check their map, and thought my land was under their jurisdiction. I called the number listed, no answer. I sent an email, no reply. Weeks later, another notice showed up, this time threatening fines for failure to comply. That was when my stomach began to tighten. I decided to walk over to one of their meetings, thinking I could clear it up in person. I stood quietly in the back until the public comment portion, and when my turn came, I explained plainly that my land wasn't within their subdivision and therefore not under their control. The president gave me a smirk I'll never forget and said, "Community standards don't stop at a property line." I reminded her that legally, yes, they did. She laughed, said the board would review it, and that was the end of it. Also, I thought, the notices kept coming, each one worded more aggressively than the last. At first, it felt absurd, like being bullied by children playing government. But then one Saturday, I came back from town and saw what they'd done. 8 of my oaks lay in ruin on the slope, cut down in broad daylight. The plaques and crosses I had set for my brothers were scattered, some broken, stumped into the date. A hired crew had come with chainsaws, sanctioned by the HOA, and turned my memorial grove into stumps. I stood there holding a grocery bag, smelling fresh sawdust, and I felt my hand shaking. Not with rage, but with something colder, heavier. Neighbors watched from a distance. None of them said a word. I didn't storm over there. I didn't scream. I collected the broken plaques and set them on my porch. That night, I spread the HOA letters across my kitchen table alongside the original memorial registration paperwork. Then I opened my laptop and began to dig. By dawn, I had downloaded plat maps, zoning ordinances, and the full text of the state's Veterans Memorial Protection Statute. I stopped emailing. I stopped calling. I stopped trying to reason with people who only understood power. From that point on, I became methodical. I filed a records request with the county recorder's office and obtained certified copies of the memorial designation, each stamped and sealed. I photographed every stump, every displaced marker, every set of boot prints leading from the subdivision fence line. I dug through their bylaws, dry reading, but necessary, and highlighted the passages that clearly stated their jurisdiction ended at their recorded boundary. For good measure, I pulled their nonprofit registration from the state and discovered they had let it lapse for 6 months. During that time, they hadn't even existed as a legal entity. Meanwhile, the letters continued. A neighbor whispered that the board was planning to reclaim my land as a community park. My wife started dreading the sight of envelopes on our porch. My daughter stopped playing outside, saying she was scared of the mean ladies with clipboards. That was when it sank in. This wasn't about trees. It was about erasure, about arrogance, about people convinced they could rewrite my life by fiat. So I prepared. I met with the County Veterans Affairs liaison and handed over everything. The photographs, the documents, the maps. He didn't even let me finish before he shook his head and told me this was more than a civil matter. Destroying a registered veterans memorial was a potential criminal violation under state law. He made the calls himself. Within weeks, I had letters in hand from both the county and the state preservation office. Each affirmed the grove's protected status and ordered the HOA to cease all actions immediately. I tucked those letters neatly into my folder, 42 pages deep, and waited. The right moment came at their next board meeting. I walked in quietly, folder under my arm, and sat in the back until they called for comments. When I rose, the president tried to cut me off, claiming I wasn't a recognized member. I set the folder on the table and slid it toward their lawyer. No theatrics, no raised voice. Just paper. He opened it, read a few lines, and the smugness drained from his face. He whispered urgently to the president, whose jaw tightened as she glanced at the seals. I explained calmly that the grove was a registered veterans memorial, protected by state and federal law, that their crew had destroyed it, that the county and state had already been notified, that their nonprofit status was under review for dissolution. The silence that followed was the kind you could feel in your teeth. They tried to bluster. The president accused me of forging documents until the lawyer pointed out the county seals. Another board member suggested a compromise, as if saplings in plastic tubes could replace 30-year-old oaks and the names I had placed beneath them. I didn't argue. I gathered my folder, told them the state investigator would be in touch, and left. The fallout was swift. Within a month, the president resigned. 2 more board members followed. The HOA was fined heavily by the county for operating outside its jurisdiction, and the State Preservation Office filed a formal complaint for destruction of a protected site. Word spread quickly, and for the first time, neighbors began coming to me instead of avoiding me. Some knocked on my door to apologize. Others left small gestures, a pie, a plate of cookies, on the porch. I accepted them with polite nods, not forgiveness. The grove won't return overnight. Trees grow on their own time, and maybe I won't live to see them as tall as they once were. But the land is still hay. The plaques are reset, and the law now stands guard where arrogance once trampled. The HOA that once thought itself untouchable has been hollowed out, its letters silenced, its authority reduced to ashes. Now, when I drive through the subdivision, some people wave awkwardly. Others look away. Either way, it's quiet. And that's all I ever wanted, quiet. Not control, not power, just respect for what was sacred and what was mine. They thought cutting down my oaks would erase something permanent. Instead, it gave me the leverage to cut them down piece by piece, without ever raising my voice.